Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me today is John Cameron. And missing here today that you don't see is our executive director, Mr. Gail Morgan. He is out ill today, and so we wish him a speedy recovery and say a nice, pleasant hello and get better soon, Gail. We miss you.
Gail, get well.
We miss you and we love
Get
you.
well soon.
Yeah.
Come back soon so your irascible nature will be present here again.
Yeah, things go smoother when Mr. Gail is around.
Yes,
So
they
yeah,
do.
yeah, you know, we miss him when he's not here.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. Miss him even if he wasn't working. He's a good guy. Yeah.
All right. So speaking about people working, Mr. Richard Fields has been working hard, and the establishment. Let's see. What's he put it? The establishment commentariat. Richard always comes up with these words that I have trouble pronouncing. Commentariat is having a bit of a difficult time. So let's see what Mr. Richard Fields has to say about that.
Yeah. I think they should have a different.
Hi, this is Richard Fields with this week's report from the fields. The establishment commentariat is having a really hard time figuring out how Donald J. Trump managed to get elected president twice. The second time as a convicted felon with documented sexual peccadillos and a record of a businessman that was littered with bankruptcies, and against a black woman that had much less personal baggage, other than using Willie Brown to gain entry into the halls of power and disposing of him unceremoniously after he was no longer useful, that is. Let me put forth an explanation that I have not heard elsewhere. Affirmative action. Women and people of color who have been beneficiaries of affirmative action since the 1960s hated Trump and voted overwhelmingly for Harris. Men, particularly white men, who have been effectively discriminated against by those affirmative action policies for the last 60 years, voted for the candidate who made it clear that he detested the concept of affirmative action and the accompanying diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI programs. Trump, ever the transactional politician, immediately rewarded his male base by issuing executive orders that seek to root out affirmative action and DEI entirely. Affirmative action and DEI were largely created by executive order in the first place, by JFK in 1961, mandating federal contractors take affirmative action to ensure equal employment opportunities without regard to race, creed, color, or national origin. LBJ followed up with another executive order which prohibited discrimination on those bases. Discrimination based on sex was added shortly after. From a libertarian perspective, there is no morally defensible reason to defend discrimination on any of those factors. But discrimination based on ability and the willingness to work hard is eminently defensible. The U.S. has a long history of legally discriminating against racial groups and women, pretty much like every other political jurisdiction in the world at that time. It needed to end, but ending it by changing who is discriminated against, that would be white men, is not morally defensible. And that is the perception that smart, hardworking men have been sensing for decades now. They don't like it. That's why they voted overwhelmingly for Trump. And Trump delivered. In the words of his press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, promises made, promises kept. President Trump campaigned on ending the scourge of DEI from our federal government and returning America to a merit-based society where people are hired on their skills, not for the color of their skin. On this issue, it's hard to make a moral argument against Trump. On immigration and tariffs and a myriad of other issues, it's easy. We'll be sure to point those out in future issues of Reports from the Fields. I'm Richard Fields. See you next week.
And you all can stick around till next week to hear me and John go into a kind of a deeper conversation about our own views on DEI. So we're not going to repeat that this week. But, you know, I would like to point out that it wasn't just white men that voted for Trump. It was Hispanic men and the large
A bigger
the portion
chunk,
of
a bigger
the portion
chunk.
of black men who voted for Trump grew a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it was like a half, but it was like 15, 30%.
And a
something
much
like that.
larger percentage of the Asian population as a whole, for the very reasons he mentioned, because they're basically facing quotas keeping them out of Fairfax High, that we'll talk, Thomas Jefferson High School, right, in Fairfax County, we'll talk about later, out of medical school, out of dental school, out of Harvard, out of Stanford, and all the rest of those places. So you have...
Yeah, it seems strange, John, that, that our elite students can't get into our elite schools.
Yeah.
You know, have the one place where the only thing that should matter is your educational abilities.
It should, the elites should be able to fight for positions that are best filled by elites. And I'm not saying they're elite human beings. I know a lot of really smart, quote unquote, doctors who are like the rear end of a horse, but they're really good at doctrine. So I want somebody, if they ever have to open me up again, and it's going to be really tough for somebody to convince me of that, to be the best shiny scalpel, I'm going to cut you up out there. I don't want somebody opening me up who might have gotten into medical school on some quota system. That's it. I don't want somebody who's in the air traffic control tower at SFO or SMUF or Heathrow or wherever I happen to be flying out of, be in that position because they decided they needed someone of a certain religion or someone who that perhaps we don't have enough people in a wheelchair. Unless it's a brilliant air traffic controller in a wheelchair, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
But the wheelchair, the color of the skin shouldn't make any difference.
It's one thing to go out and look into unique and interesting places to find that talent.
Oh, and you know what? We're going over it again. We went over
it.
it.
Yeah, we're going over it again.
Next
I know,
show.
John, but you know why? As we're going over it today, because I don't really want to cover this story, but we kind of have to, this next short story.
Why don't we just cover it real quick and move on?
Because that's not the right thing to do, and we try to do the right thing here.
Okay.
All right, so the Libertarian chair, Miss Angela McArdle, resigns after a cloud of embezzlement has surrounded her administration, and she's left in a, I'll call it in a huff, and joined the Trump administration for the Health and Human Services Department, magically working for RFK Jr., whom he has some kind of goofy, backwards fundraising agreement that is in a clear violation of principles, if not law, of, for the Libertarians. You don't put Libertarians' money into a candidacy for someone who's not part of the Libertarian Party, and that's essentially
what is that what we're not saying she's done that? We're saying people are saying that she's done that.
Yes.
So there is a cloud, and there are people that have. So take it with a grain of salt until it's proved, or unproved, or just blows away in the wind. Because people were calling Trump a fascist, but he's actually getting rid of government. So obviously they were wrong on that.
Yeah. But
he's a lunatic, but
I'm one who judges people on results, and the reality is, since she has become chair, the party has become a shambles. Yeah. It's a shadow of its former self, of its former strength.
Now, this is the lowest percentage it's gotten in a presidential election, Libertarian candidate, and this was a pretty good candidate. Yeah. In the last 20 years or something?
Yeah, because the leadership deliberately divided the party for whatever reason. I'm not going to speculate on reasonings, but that's exactly what happened. And so now the party is in deep trouble, and someone gets to go run off to a government job now, because she managed to play her role well. I mean, she got Trump into the national convention. She's claiming victory for the Ross Ulbricht pardon, despite she's claiming victory. She did it. It's not that the Libertarians.
She talked to Trump and had it done, or something.
Yeah, she was the one. Yeah, somehow she was the one that pushed it over.
I'm hoping after the smoke clears that somebody pardons Snowden, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
No. It's probably not. I heard that just because he became a citizen of Russia, that's kind of the that's kind of the reason he's not going to get a pardon on that one. That was the I wouldn't mind so much about Snowden being prosecuted if the people who had ran those programs he exposed had been prosecuted as well.
Well, what he simply did was what any good investigative reporter would have done and maybe got a Pulitzer Prize for. But what the people did was illegally use all such sorts of government programs to surveil U.S. citizens contrary to statute. And nothing's happening to them, so I absolutely agree with you.
And we managed to actually avoid the subject, John, so that was pretty good.
No, no. I mean, it's libertarians are supposed to have and I think I do, strong moral compasses. So it's hard to be despised by both Democrats and Republicans, but we managed to do it, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
When the Dems do something right, if they ever do, I give them credit for it. The Republicans do something right. Actually, getting rid of the deep state sounds like a really libertarian thing to do, So we'll see. But when somebody's put in a position of power and makes the party that she's the chair of less effective and guides it to means away from its moral compass, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's a bad thing. So.
Yeah.
It is what it is, and we will keep you posted as this story progresses over the next 6 months or whatever however long it's gonna go. All right. So the big story of this week, though, is DOGE. DOGE there's those on the left are afraid of this constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
Especially with USAID. And I know lots of people try to call it USAID, but it has nothing to do with aid. It's the United States Agency for International Development. It is not an aid organization. It is an economic control organization.
Well, 10% of the money that it doles out is probably helps some people. Probably. Maybe 10%. Yeah, but certainly not the $50 billion a year. Yeah, and I want to add something to this after you talk about it for a while that I just read on Public. Schellenberger has stated something pretty categorically about her. Do you want me to talk about it now?
Yeah, well, are we down to USAID, or are we just kind of the constitutional crisis?
Yeah, we'll stay with
there's
there's
a fear. You can tell who is upset, right? Only the people on the far left are actually kind of upset about what's going on right now. Centrists and everybody else, they're kind of shrugging their shoulders. But for some reason, the far left is highly, highly upset that Trump is going after the deep state, that he's reworking how it operates. And remember, when Trump first brought up the deep state, 8 years ago now, it didn't exist. And now all of a sudden, these same people who told us 8 years ago it didn't exist are now saying this deep state is the fundamental bedrock of democracy. And, well, wait, it didn't exist 8 years ago, and now you're saying it's the fundamental...
They poo-pooed and laughed at anybody who brought up the deep state as a conspiracy theorist and said it didn't exist. And then recently I watched the New York Times defend it and NPR defend it, and they were these kind, gentle souls working in lower echelon jobs in the federal government. These are the kind of people that you want to get rid of. Yes, they are. I'm sorry, but I want to get rid of their bosses more than anything.
It's not the people I want to get rid of, it's the job they're doing I want to get rid of.
Yeah.
And the reality is, when jobs end, people have to go find something else to do.
Yeah.
And it happens every day in public sector and
private sector.
Public sector. Yes, correct. Thank you, John.
Yeah,
it happens every day in the private sector, but the public sector, there's a lot of protections. And back in the day, when the agreement was, if you're a public worker, you're not going to get paid as much, but you're going to have good benefits and stability. You're going to trade that.
And you're going to come to work and do a job because you're a servant of the people. And we have given the government certain jobs to do, and we let them do that minor part of the economy that they have to do because we don't want to mess with it. Maybe the government's better at it. And then we're going to do all the rest. But, we don't have job security, but we're going to earn more than you, but we're going to have to provide for our retirement. And what has happened? The servant has become the master. It's like I have a big house in the country. I hire somebody to mow the lawn, to cook the food, to clean the house, to look after the kids. And then times get tough. Do I get to fire the cook or the groundsman? No. What I need to go do is get a second job because they're guaranteed for life. So anyway.
And this is the same party, remember, that's complaining about, Trump tariffs, but the same party, finally, I actually have to love this, finally the Democrats understand that that the end consumer pays all taxes. When it's Trump's tariffs, they understand this. But when it's their taxes, their regulations, they don't understand it. They complain about how Trump's tariffs and his costs are going to impact, low-wage workers. Completely true.
$800 a year for every family or person in the United States, yeah.
And it's completely true, but this is the same party that defends $9 to drive into Manhattan.
And they completely ignore the $1.7 trillion, which is $17,000 for every household in the country, that the regulations that the Biden administration put in. Yeah, there's no cost associated with that, but the $800 a year is a terrible thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going to actually talk about USAID, and we are not going to call it anything other than USAID, as we
United States Agency for International Development.
It is an economic control agency. It is not an aid agency.
It's even worse than that.
You know what China's Belt and Road Initiative? Where do you think they learned that? They learned it from this.
USAID.
They are just copying what we have been doing.
Yeah.
And they are bankrupting small countries. Mexico knows this very well. Mexico won't play with AID.
Guatemala,
AID
El Salvador, all the South American countries, many countries in Southeast Asia, all the rest of that, because everything comes with strings, and who knows what their goal is globalism, basically, and that's why. How did the modern Michelangelo describe it? Kind of make people upset when I talk about that. Or Leonardo da Vinci, the modern Leonardo da Vinci said, "It's not an apple with a worm in it; it's a ball of worms." And our President Trump, I wish NPR would call him President Trump instead of Trump, because we had to call Biden President Biden, and he wasn't even the president. So.
No, to be fair, a lot of us people call him Brandon. So
Yeah, Brandon. Yeah. He said it's run by a bunch of left-wing lunatics. And now I'll talk about it. There's a guy named Michael Schellenberger who has. He was one of the people that the Twitter files were given to, that exposed all this corruption and censorship on the part of the United States government. USAID was a big part of that, and now Schellenberger's saying pretty categorically, at least the way I read it, that the USAID and the CIA got together and conspired to get Trump impeached and to keep him from getting elected the second time, and did everything they could to try to keep him from being elected the first time. So that is patently illegal, folks. The CIA is not supposed to do anything on the shores of this country, much less try to influence who wins an election in the United States. But not only are they doing it, that's what USAID does through all these little nonprofits it funds around the world. It foments rebellion and supports candidates that we like, not we, you and I, but they like, the career bureaucrats. They call the people in the State Department and what's going on there. It's so amorphous and hard to discern and figure out and look at. They call it the blob, because it's like something out of a sci-fi movie. It really is.
Yeah. Well, there is one person in the world who has been taking a chainsaw to the blob, John, and that is Javier Milei down in Argentina. He has announced he's withdrawing from the WHO.
Who?
And he's not the only one. Trump has wanted to pull out of the WHO.
Yeah.
From America's perspective, we're spending way too much money, and the rest of the world isn't contributing enough. Yeah. And so until these start kicking in,
I think Italy's going to pull out, and I think you're going to see a bunch of other people pull out. But if you get a chance, folks, try to find, and I wish I had it in front of me to put up on there, the text of his very short speech about why he's pulling out of the WHO. He says because they let China not answer questions about the origins of COVID. China still hasn't produced the information they have about what happened to COVID in their country. They refused to respond when Taiwan in December of 2019 said, WHO, please look at the Wuhan area of China, because they are having many, many cases of a very unusual and deadly form of pneumonia. And they refused to look at it. Guess what that was, folks? COVID. And the WHO didn't look at it. And the WHO hasn't held the Chinese people's feet to the fire, and it hasn't held Fauci's feet to the fire, and Javier Milei, I'm going to call him Javier like we're buddies. like to be his buddy. Basically blamed who for the 100,000 people that lost their jobs, their families, their business, had more than that in Argentina because of they followed WHO guidelines that were made up out of thin air, the kids that lost their educations, the 100,000 people that died. Blames it on WHO and says, according to I think the UN Charter, the WHO is guilty of, the WHO, guilty of crimes against humanity, and that's why he's pulled from it.
Yeah, and sadly, John, we predicted all of that. We predicted that all of this stuff was going to be, at some point in the future, shown to be massively overblown at best, and it was massively overblown at best. And the dangers, the deep state, call it what you want, the medical state, took advantage of a perceived emergency to enrich their power.
Yeah.
And now that power is being taken away, they're all flipping out. They're all flipping out.
Just to add another little tidbit, and then I know we got to move on. There's a bunch of attorneys general. Is that what you call them? Attorneys general. In some states, I won't mention which states. See, Fauci has immunity from federal crimes. Basically, he was pardoned for any federal crimes. He wasn't pardoned for crimes in states, folks. And the DAs, the attorney generals, the AGs of a number of states are going after him for the fraud, for lying to the American people, for siphoning off money, for basically having his wife approve the drugs that he recommended, on and on and on and on. And they're going after him. And I hope they get him and throw him in prison.
Well, I think it was either Thomas Massey or Rand Paul brought up the point that now he has immunity from prosecution. He no longer has the ability to stay silent. So he has to come to, if they call him in front of Congress, they can compel him to testify. And if he does not testify, then he's in
contempt of Congress. Yeah.
I've
been in contempt of Congress for years.
Yeah, so. I am not a fan of using contempt of Congress as tools.
There's
times where I will look away.
If they compel him to give testimony and evidence truthfully in order to pursue a criminal charge against someone else, and he refuses to do that, then fair game, Fauci.
Fair game.
I hope you enjoy prison, bro.
Well, speaking of games, the DNC had their yearly convention, and they have elected new leaders. Now, one of their vice chairs happens to be David Hogg. The new Democratic Party chair is Ken Martin from. They're already
David Hogg, the grifter from
Parkland. Yeah, they're already.
Was it Parkland or from the other one?
Parkland shooting.
Parkland. Yeah, I know. One of my former coworkers had a kid there, and none of those people down there. Have you been to Florida, folks? They like their guns. Nobody down there wants gun control. Not even the people most of the people who have students at Parkland, they're about 80% pro-guns. They wish that the teachers had been armed and it wouldn't have happened.
But let's tell you how kind of goofy these political parties who choose their leadership. I have a serious problem with how most political parties. 482 people were in the room to vote. Yeah. It was 482 Democrats decided the fate and the future of the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
That's what it wasn't.
Kind of like what happened at.
Same thing. Whoever can fill a room wins. And that's a fundamental problem with how parties choose their leadership. It's not a representative body. It's the most active, it's the most activist who is able to travel are the ones who can show up. So people who have time and money are the people who go to these things and who are highly motivated through political, due to their political ideology. Those are who gets to choose our party leadership.
They probably got paid from USAID. To get there.
Some of them may, John. It would not necessarily surprise me, but it was there was all kinds of goofiness. Now, goofiness happens at parties, right? The Libertarians are famous for the naked guy. The goofiness happens.
Oh, he's a nice guy, though. I've met him.
Yeah.
And he's a very nice man.
But you don't want to see, as a person who's sitting there and watching a political party convention.
It doesn't get you a lot of votes.
You don't want to see that, but the reality is no one else is paying attention.
Yeah.
The rest of the world isn't paying attention. No one cares what happened at the DNC, which is actually the problem, because only 482 people decided the future direction of the party. That's the problem. And we don't see that. I've been long pointing out that the Libertarian Party needs to elect their board member just like a private business does. Every dues-paying member should have a vote.
Stockholders.
Yes.
Shareholders.
Shareholders.
Yeah.
Every single dues-paying member should have a vote.
I'll go out on a limb and make everybody in the world, even you, mad at me. You know that no taxation without representation? How about no representation without taxation, folks? If you're not footing the bill, why should you get to vote where the money gets spent? But that's just me. Go on.
No, that's just my solution to this problem. Is you actually have these parties should be representative of everybody who's paying their way, and that's the dues-paying members. Every dues-paying member should have a vote, and then you would get a much more representative body leading these organizations.
I agree, absolutely.
So
vote for some electors and send them.
So, John, Spain is having some economic growth, and this is, I forgot to turn my phone down, and this is kind of the interesting thing, correct? Because no one's really been in control of Spain for the last few years.
That's,
it's been kind of coasting, right? If my memory serves.
Yeah.
It's been kind of coasting.
They haven't been able to form a government because the socialist government's there with a very thin coalition, so they basically haven't been able to do anything for a year and a half, and their economy's doing really well because they haven't been able to put any government programs in place. Same thing happened in Belgium. They couldn't put a government together for about 18 months. I think it was 500 and something days. That isn't 18 months. It was a long time, and the Belgian economy did well. And the same thing, I'm guessing, is probably going to happen in France because they're having a dickens of a time putting a government together. And if the government can't meddle, then the economy is going to improve. The lesson here is that you get the government out of the way. They're going to take credit for it, even though they weren't allowed to do anything. Their hands were tied because they couldn't agree to bring stuff to a vote, and the economy improved. There's a lesson there, folks. That's called libertarianism.
Yeah, you get out the way. It's amazing what happens when, even if all you do is not change anything, just say nothing's going to change for a couple of years, and people can actually plan for a future. Hey, well, they're not going to be able to put any new taxes or new regulations, so I can actually go ahead and invest in this plant or this upgrade or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And John, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you for being here. Gail, thank you for watching. You get better. We miss you and we love you. Thank everybody inside for helping, especially Marcus for showing up tonight. And John, I already thank you for being here. You, out there, thank you for watching. Please remember, we love everybody and have a good night.
Especially those who don't deserve it, folks. Love them all.
Every single buddy.
Yeah.
The world needs more love.
More love.
You can never have enough love. It's not possible to have too much love.
So, since I never know when the show's going to end,